If everybody could please take their seats. No, I'm kidding. Just joking. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Linda Knoeck with the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm in the Palm Beach Gardens Regulatory Office, and we also have two representatives from the Miami office here today, Jessica and Gladys. And so they gave us a lot of time today to talk about permitting, but I've been doing this for quite a while, and I know you guys have all been doing it for quite a while. And so I just would like to touch on just some basics and then leave plenty of time for any comments or questions or anything like that. I guess the rocket is launching later, so I don't have to compete with the rocket. But so let's just begin. Artificial reefs. Now, you guys have everybody in here except for the Army Corps of Engineers, you guys do an excellent job of. More exciting job than I have of planning and constructing and staging and financing and finding money to do all of these amazing restoration works. And then you guys have to sit down and realize you need a federal permit to do that. And then you have to come to me. And that may not be the most fun way of handling it, but hopefully I can make it as smooth as process as possible. I like to think of I am a regulator. So really, I'm just upholding, the laws and making sure that your projects are upholding the laws and regulations that are set out by a lot smarter people than myself that decide that this is how certain things should be done. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about the Corps' authority, things that you should consider when you're designing your permits or your project considerations. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time between the difference between acceptable and unacceptable, deployment material. I think we all kind of know, everybody in here knows what that would be. Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has, standards on what's acceptable, but we'll touch a little bit on that. And then of course, the big one that I really would like to talk about, because there has been some changes, is regarding our consultation with National Marine Fisheries under the Endangered Species Act. So the Army Corps of Engineers, we have authority to regulate artificial reefs, specifically Section 10 and Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act and Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which is navigation structures, or structures in navigable waters, and or the discharge of fill material, which is 404. Specifically, we have Section 322. I love regs. I'm sorry. Section 322.5B, where it just says that the district engineer gets to review the provisions for siting and construction, operating, monitoring, and maintaining these structures. So that's why I'm involved. The things to, when you guys are planning your artificial reefs, the Corps and our authority, most of the reefs that we look at are within state waters, and state waters for the southeast of Florida is 3 nautical miles. So anything within that 3 mile distance requires a Corps permit and a state permit. But sometimes for deeper reefs, there are outside of the state waters and where you don't need a state permit, but you still need your federal authorization. And when those things happen, there's just one extra step to the review of your federal permit, and that is the Corps has to individually consult to make sure that we get our CZM consistency. So when you guys are the experts here in designing and siting your projects. However, when you come to me or you submit an application to the Army Corps of Engineers, we do want you to discuss how you chose that. And that really comes down to your objective, which is really important to the Army Corps of Engineers, because your objective and project purpose is important to alternatives and other things that we consider. So whether your project is restoration or enhancement, recreation purpose, or for mitigation, is very important that you describe that to us, because that goes into our review. And I know when we consult with the other federal agencies, they also want to know what the purpose of your reefs are. Obviously, when you're planning your artificial reefs, navigation is a big concern. Again, Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act has navigation, and we want to make sure that we're not putting any structures out there that could possibly impede navigation. One thing also about navigation, I know Paul, Guiones was supposed to be here from NOAA Charting. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it. So I just would like to touch now, or maybe it's in my next slide. Yeah, it is. Just a little bit about NOAA Charting and their role in our decision-making process with your federal authorization. And also, of course, we want to protect the resources. I want to make sure that, you've thought about everything to protect the resources, but that's kind of the point of artificial reefs, is for enhancement and recreation. So very rarely do I ever get any projects from all of you guys, because they're all very well thought out, that would impact any, corals or seagrass or things like that. But there are questions that we do have to ask for. So take these things in consideration when you are submitting your application to the Corps. So other permit considerations, this is a big one because I've been doing this for a little over 10 years. And for, in the beginning, we weren't coordinating all of your proposed projects with NOAA Charting, and it's super important. And that was a mistake that we quickly rectified. But NOAA Charting charts everything on nautical charts, and your artificial reefs need to be charted as well. And it's the Corps' responsibility to make sure that coordination with NOAA Charting occurs. And so with that being said, when you're submitting your applications with your drawings, we want to have the coordinates of where your reefs are located. Now, for a lot of the county municipality projects that have large deployment areas offshore, we're just looking for the coordinates for the box. A lot of the maybe smaller reef sections within the intercoastal waterway or in our inlets and things like that, we may not necessarily need boxes, but we'll need specific locations. But we'll need those locations, and we will coordinate those with NOAA Charting, and Paul will tell us if what is written down matches, your coordinates that you guys have provided in drawings, and we'll make any corrections at that point. Because once the permit is finalized, NOAA Charting gets a copy of it, and then that's put on the NOAA chart. One other thing that the Corps does as well when we ask for the depth of your structure. So we want to know the depth of clearance, and that's I know some other government entities, they don't care so much about what the specific depth of closure is, and that is the distance from the top of your reef material to the top of the water column. And they just say half the distance or something like that, but we need very specific cross section showing the distance and what that distance is. And NOAA Charting wants that as well. And that'll actually be a special condition and something that our enforcement can go out there and actually make sure and see that you guys are adhering to that. And it's important because, again, we just want to make sure that there's no navigational issues. Other things to take in consideration is that when you guys are designing or submitting an application, is that we want to know what's out there, especially for new reef deployment areas or new reefs. So, I kind of feel silly even talking about some of this stuff because, of course, you guys have been out there and did preliminary surveys of your benthic areas, but we also want to have a copy of that so we know your existing conditions, whether it's sand base or is it sediment, mucky or seagrass, hard bottom, unconsolidated corals or near coral reefs. We really do need to know all of that existing information. I'm sure you guys have already thought about it, so it should be simple to just provide us that documentation. And that really goes into a lot of our coordination with the other federal resource agencies, because they do require buffers between deployments and the deployment material and the existing resources. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't have your artificial reef closer to some other, aquatic resources, because sometimes that is the purpose of your recreation or enhancement activities. And in those situations, then we can work with the other federal resource agencies and other minimization measures or things like that to allow a smaller buffer. But typically there are standard buffers that our other federal resource agencies like. Okay, acceptable material. The important thing here is to make sure that what you're deploying in the water is going to be stable. So, 500 pounds, or is it able to, withstand, a 20-year or 50-year storm? Is it going to be anchored? We don't want to put things out there, especially if there's near resources and storms move around. We just had hurricanes. So, obviously we can't ever make 100% sure that the material we're putting out there doesn't move around, but we need to have reasonable assurance that it's not going to do that, because we don't want things going in, as far as the core is concerned, if anything's close to the channel, we don't want things rolling into the channel and obstructing our operation and maintenance of, you know, the federal channel or anywhere else where there's existing resources, because you as an applicant and permittee could be liable for, you know, any obstruction to navigation and aquatic resources. We also don't want you putting down there anything down there that you know, has toxic and things like that. So that's why there's a list of criteria of things that are approved already. The Corps can review anything that's not on an approved list. We just review it individually. More accept, I mean, these may be some of your guys' pictures. I just kind of grabbed them from the internet, but you know, we have concrete, rock, aluminum, alloy, metals. I know boats, you guys all know all of these things, but again, when they become larger and larger structures, you know, Corps is probably going to look for some kind of analysis that you've taken into consideration that it's not going to move around. And the Corps' regulatory department or division does sometimes take these, you know, storm analysis and allow our engineering department and things like that to look at them because they're more qualified. But again, we just want to make sure that what we're putting down there is going to remain stable. More reef stuff that's unacceptable. We're dealing with this a lot right now. There's always lessons learned. So, I mean, a lot of people know about the Osborne Reef and, you know, the tires and things like that. So, you know, sometimes, you know, we don't always make good decisions, and we have to clean those things up. So there are lessons learned, and I'm sure there'll be lessons learned in 10 years or 20 years when we're all back here again about what's, you know, what works and what doesn't work. So, and that's fine. It's just as long as we learn our lessons and always strive to be better. I kind of want to wrap up just talking about this new biological opinion that we have with the National Marine Fisheries, because it does have to deal with your permitting. And it really is a great new resource that we have, because the Corps worked with National Marine Fisheries, the Protected Resource Division, to come up with a programmatic biological opinion on listed species and for in-water work. And the JaxBO is what we call it. It's for all of Jacksonville district, so the whole state of Florida. But it's not restricted to nationwide or general permits. It's really it's project specific. So it utilizes project design criteria to comply with ESA and meet the agency's which describes how you're going to do that. Basically, just go down there and kind of clean up some things. But there's also a piece of paper that kind of describes the cleanup method also. A lot of these other project design criteria, they're very specific. So they want you to have, a certain amount of spaces in between your reef modules. They want certain size of holes, and that all goes to what Mike was mentioning about turtle entrapment and things like that. So it kind of already took the artificial reefs and they determined the project design criteria that would have the least amount of evasiveness, and they already they already looked at the effects of those. And so, if you can make your project fit one of these, then these design criteria, then it's beneficial. The special conditions for activity 7, again, it's very similar to what you guys probably have already seen with regarding what's approved reef material. Reef section dimensions, new reef sections, they're limited to, a quarter of a nautical mile. They want a certain amount of space in between, the linear nature of them as well. Obviously, all of these have a benthic assessment. And again, cleaning all reefs must be cleaned annually. And that's why I also referenced activity 9, because it tells you how to, for reef cleanups, activity 9 for debris removal. Just kind of looking over this to see. I'm looking at the benthic assessment report. If materials are offloaded from a barge or placed in areas that may generate turbidity, a 500-foot buffer is required. So like I said, I haven't gone and even read all the specifics of these myself. I just want to make you aware that there are, very specific project design criteria to meet the JaxBO Activity 7. Again, here's some reef designs that the analysis has already been looked at. So you can see here, just example, 3-sided module where each side of the top opening is at least 36 inches in length. So again, Mike had hit on that, seeing reef designs where the top of these structures or modules are open to allow sea turtles to be able to escape. And of course, no explosives. Now, these are just to meet like this programmatic biological opinion. So of course, if your project does not meet any of these, we just go through the normal consultation. And I just put up the reef cleanup. One thing you'll notice about the activity 9 reef, the cleanup, is it doesn't give you any kind of direction with notification to the Corps or NIPS. We are aware that it's a little vague on how you notify us that you are meeting this. But you as the applicant, if you meet the JaxBO, you're responsible to meet all of the project design criteria. So these are the core kind of standardized conditions for artificial reefs. So I'm sure a lot of these are very familiar to you. We have an initial agency notification. So NOAA charting, the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers. We have an authorized reef material, special condition, reef parameters, and that is the depth of closure for the reef and the top of the water that we coordinate with NOAA charting. Protection of existing resources, and then of course, the pre-deployment notification and the post-deployment placement form. Those are 2 forms that you as the permittee are required to fill out and submit. And that goes to our enforcement once those are completed. And that's how we kind of do our compliance checks for artificial reefs. As you know, the Corps, we don't get out there and actually look at that. We really rely on those reports coming back. Ownership and maintenance and liability, you are liable for your artificial reef. And that's pretty much, oh, well, there's more. These are the ESA permit conditions. So sea turtles and sawfish, that's you guys are aware of that. Manatee protection. And that really is, that's not National Marine Fisheries, but that's Fish and Wildlife Service. So when that more has to deal with the fenders on your boats and your barges and things like that. Obviously manatee observers as well. Marine life entrapment. and protected species guidance for vessel strike avoidance measures. So that again is the responsibility of the permittee to submit all of those forms as well. So that's in summary, when you're planning your projects, take in consideration, the project purpose and the reasoning why you're wanting to locate something somewhere and have good justification for that. Also be aware of navigational issues or issues with existing resources that we don't want to impact any of those. Keep in mind the permit review length when you're trying to plan and organize and finance, your endeavors and how long it takes to get your federal or state authorization. We encourage pre-application meetings as well to try to speed up the process as much as possible, but having a good idea in your mind, no matter how efficient that we're trying to make it for you, you should have a realistic idea in your mind of how long it actually takes to get your federal permit authorization so you can properly plan as well. And then Miami wanted me to also include, Miami is not within my jurisdiction of things that I look at, but I don't know if Gladys wants to mention anything about the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Okay. But they have special regulations and rules and permits that they need from there as well. So she can, Jessica and Gladys are more than happy to answer any questions you have about that. This presentation is going to be posted. So, these are just really good references. So our source book, the Army Corps of Engineers source book, has all of the deployment forms and everything that you need. And they also have a link to the JaxBO and project design criteria and things like that. So, you can just put this in your viewfinder and save it for later. See someone taking a picture of it. Okay. And just I wanted to mention one other thing is just to remind everybody, I'm only here to talk about artificial reefs, but I'm not here to talk about the government shutdown or the state assumption or anything like that. But I did want to just remind everybody, the Corps put out a public notice in August and October stating that we're no longer accepting joint applications with the state, and you have to submit separately to us as well. So just trying to make it easier for you. Just kidding. Just kidding. There was some, at one conference, somebody had mentioned, somebody from the Corps, much higher than myself, said that we were going to accept JCP applications, so any coastal applications for beaches and things like that. But just know that we are no longer accepting state joint applications. And I think that, yeah, I don't even have a fun slide. So that's it. Thank you so much for talking regulation.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
At this time, guys, she's still here. Everyone loves a good permitting question. Does anyone have questions for Linda? Yeah.
What percentage of the proposed activities for artificial reefs are outside of outstanding Florida waters?
What percentage of artificial reefs are outside of state waters?
What percentage of proposed activities are outside of Florida waters?
I have no idea. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be sarcastic with that. I don't have statistics on how many permits or applications are within state waters or outside of state waters. I don't.
Did I see another hand up in the room? Back here. Oh, we have an online question. This is exciting.